Nathaniel Vane pulled the footman's livery over his shoulders and heard the seams complain, and that small protest of stitching pleased him more than any compliment he had received that season. The coat had been cut for a narrower man. It pinched across the back, bound at the arms, and refused to forgive him the width his fencing master had spent 15 years building. He worked the last button through, with fingers that had never in his life fastened another man's coat, and when he looked at himself in the long glass of the dressing room, borrowed plush, borrowed gloves, his own hard jaw above a collar that did not belong to him, he saw a stranger, a servant, a nobody. Exactly the man he meant to be for the next fortnight.
"You will be discovered before noon," said Pelham, who had been the Duke of Calderwood's valet for 20 years and considered the entire scheme an affront to good order.
"Your hands, Your Grace. Forgive me."
"A footman's hands are not those hands."
"Then I shall keep them behind my back, as the good ones do." "And your voice?" "I have a voice for the stables and a voice for the lords. I am told they are not the same man." Nathaniel turned from the glass. "Calder is away in town until the month's end. The new companion arrives today, hired sight unseen by my mother's solicitor, recommended by a woman I have never met. She will come into this house, take the salary I pay, sit at my mother's elbow, and within a week she will know my mother's habits, her weaknesses,
the hour she is least guarded.
I will not hand a blind woman over to a stranger on the strength of a letter. I mean to watch the stranger first. A footman is furniture. No one performs for furniture." Pelham's silence had a great deal of opinion in it. "Say it," Nathaniel told him. "Your mother, Your Grace, has not been able to see your face for 3 years. She knows you by other means now. She will know you. My mother believes I am in Northumberland, buying a hunter I have no intention of buying. She is expecting her son's footman to be exactly what he appears." He tugged the borrowed glove smooth. "John. I'm John, hired on from the Hartfield house. Try it." "I will not call you John." "You will, or you will give the whole game away with a flinch every time someone in the hall says it. Which is why you will not be here to say it. You go back to town within the hour, Pelham, before the new staff learn your face. A duke's own valet hovering over a new footman would undo me by Tuesday. Carry the story to London that I am in the north. Wait for my letter. No one in this house knows you, and no one shall." Pelham drew himself up to the precise height that 20 years of service had taught him to deploy as a final objection. "John," he said, as though the word had been left out overnight and gone sour. Below them, the great bell at the gate rang once, and a carriage came up the drive over wet gravel, and the spring rain that had been threatening since dawn finally let itself down in earnest across the parkland of Calderwood Hall. Miss Clara Ainsworth had counted her remaining coins 3 times on the road from the receiving inn, and the count had not improved with repetition. 11 shillings, a clergyman's daughter's whole fortune, and a position she had taken without seeing the house, the lady, or the salary, written in any hand but a solicitor's. She had learned, in the 2 years since her father's living had passed to a stranger and his roof with it, that a woman with 11 shillings does not interview her employers. She accepts. She is grateful. She arrives in the rain in her one good travelling gown, a deep bronze-green wool that had been her mother's and recut twice, and she does not let the housekeeper see that her hands are cold. The carriage stopped. The door opened before she had touched it, and a footman in plum-coloured livery handed her down into the wet, without quite meeting her eye, which was correct, and held the great umbrella over her and not himself, which was also correct, and walked her up the steps at a pace exactly half a step slower than her own, which was wrong. Footman matched a lady's pace. This one set it, the way a man used to leading sets it, and corrected himself a beat too late, falling back so abruptly that the umbrella tilted, and a cold rope of rainwater ran down the back of Clara's neck. "Oh, I beg your pardon, miss," he said. "You needn't beg it," said Clara, who was wet through,
and had 11 shillings and no patience left for the day. You need only hold the umbrella as though you have held one before. There, lower, on my side. You are tall. The rain comes off the edge in a sheet onto the short people of the world. We exist. The footman lowered the umbrella. There was a silence under it that did not feel like a servant's silence. It felt like a man deciding whether to be amused. And then he said, "Yes, miss," in a voice that was a great deal too educated for the coat he wore, and Clara, who had spent her girlhood among curates and scholars and her father's table of borrowed clergymen, filed the contradiction away without quite knowing why. The doors opened. Warmth and beeswax and the smell of lilac came out to meet her. Someone had cut armfuls of it and stood it in jars the length of the hall, white and purple, dripping its scent into the wet air, the petals already browning at their edges in the heat of the fires, a faint sweetness over the sharper smells of wet wool and wood smoke, and the lavender rubbed into the polished oak. And a housekeeper with a chatelaine and a face like a closed account book said, "Miss Ainsworth, you are expected. Her Grace does not care to be kept." "Then we are of one mind already," said Clara, and stepped inside, and did not look back at the footman, though she was aware, the way one is aware of a draught from a door one cannot see, that he watched her go. The Dowager Duchess of Calderwood sat by the fire in the morning room with her back to the window, which surprised Clara until she understood. A woman who cannot see does not sit to face the light. She sits to feel it on the side of her face and know the hour. The Dowager was perhaps 60, upright as a fire iron, in dove-grey silk with a single ring on her right hand, and her eyes, pale, clouded, beautiful in the way that very still water is beautiful, moved toward the door a half-second before Clara's foot crossed the sill. "You walk lightly," the Dowager said, "and you stopped in the hall to smell the lilac. I heard you stop. Most people walk through it as though it were wallpaper. Come here, where I can hear you better. Sit. Not there. There, where the chair does not squeak, unless you wish to announce every shift of your weight to me for the rest of the afternoon. You are the companion." "I am, Your Grace. Clara Ainsworth." Ainsworth, a clergyman's name. "My father was rector of Stoke Marling in Dorset." Was. The Dowager's clouded eyes did not move, but something in her face did. "You have buried him recently." 2 years, Your Grace." "And your mother before, by the way you said his name and not hers. And no brother, or you would not be here. And no fortune, or you would be home." The old woman lifted her chin. "Forgive me. It is my one entertainment now, putting people together out of pieces, the way a child does a dissected map. I am very rude with it. I shall be rude with you for a fortnight, and then either we shall be friends, or you shall write to the agency and tell them I am impossible. Which is true? Give me your hand." Clara gave it. The Dowager's fingers, dry and quick and astonishingly strong, ran over Clara's palm, her knuckles, the pads of her fingers, the small old callus where a pen had ridden for years. "You write a great deal," the Dowager said. "And you have darned your own gloves. And you are not afraid of me, which the last 3 were, the silly creatures, as though blindness were a contagion one might catch by sitting close. Yes, you will do." She released the hand. "Now ring the bell. We will have tea, and you will tell me everything you mean to lie to me about over the coming weeks, so that I may have the pleasure of catching you in it later." Clara rang the bell. A footman came, the tall one, the one from the rain. John, his name turned out to be, called so by the housekeeper in the hall with a snap, and set the tray, and the Dowager turned her face toward him as he set down the pot. "You are new," she said. "Yes, Your Grace. John, Your Grace. On from the Hartfield house." The Dowager said nothing for a moment. Her clouded eyes rested on the middle distance, somewhere past his plum-coloured shoulder.
Clara, watching, saw the old woman's mouth move very slightly, as though she had tasted something and was deciding what it was. "John," the dowager said at last, pleasantly, "you set a tray down like a man putting a sword on a table. Soften it. There is no one here you need impress with the weight of your own arm." And she smiled, a small, private, perfectly unreadable smile, and turned back to Clara, and the footman went out, and Clara thought no more of it. Then, than that the old lady missed nothing she could hear. She would think of it a great deal more later. The thing about being furniture, Nathaniel discovered, was that furniture worked. He had not known. He had run the estate, the seat, 4 lesser properties, a London house, and a place in the Lords for 11 years, and he had genuinely not known that a footman carried colds up 3 flights before the family woke, that the polishing of a single epergne took an hour and the skin off 2 knuckles, that one stood, simply stood, against a wall for the length of a dinner one was forbidden to eat, until the arches of one's feet sang. By the 2nd day, his admiration for the men he paid had become a kind of shame. By the 3rd, he had ruined a pair of his own gloves, dropped a sauce boat he caught an inch from the carpet, and been told by the under-butler, a man named Sturgis, who did not know he was speaking to his master, that he was willing but soft, and will harden you or will lose you, my lad, and I'd as soon harden you, for you've a civil tongue. "Thank you, Mr. Sturgis," said the Duke of Calderwood, and meant it more than he had meant most things. But the part he had come for, the watching, that he could do. He carried the coal scuttle, and he watched. He set the trays, and he watched. And what he watched, hour by hour, was the slow disproof of every suspicion that had put him in this coat. He had expected a companion to flatter. Clara Ainsworth did not flatter. When the dowager declared, on the 2nd morning, that the Italian poets were all of them frauds excepting Dante, and that she would hear no argument, Clara said, "Then I shall make the argument anyway, Your Grace, and you may have the pleasure of not hearing it," and read her Petrarch until the old woman fell asleep smiling. He had expected a companion to manage, to steer a rich blind widow gently toward the companion's own comfort. Clara did the opposite. She refused to wrap the dowager in wool. She let her pour her own tea and spill it and swear at it. She walked her out into the wet garden over the housekeeper's objections. "She will take cold, miss." "She will take cold, sitting indoors resenting the door, Mrs. Felden, which is worse." And stood the old woman in the middle of the lilac walk and said, "There, now you are in it, not beside it." And the dowager had lifted her ruined eyes to the rain and breathed in until her whole frame shook. And Nathaniel, raking gravel 40 feet away because Sturgis had set him to it, had to turn his face to the hedge. The rain came soft and grey and smelled of turned earth and bruised lilac. It beaded on the old woman's grey silk and ran down the rake-handle cold under his blistered palms. Somewhere, a thrush sang the wet morning open. The gravel hissed under the rake. The whole drenched garden breathed lilac at them, sweet and heavy, and almost too much. The scent a blind woman could drink when she could no longer see the blooms that made it. He had come to guard his mother from a stranger. He had not reckoned on the stranger guarding his mother better than he did. "You, John." Clara's voice, behind him in the lilac walk. He had not heard her cross the gravel. She walked lightly. The dowager had said so, and it was true. He was learning the truth of every small thing the old woman had heard in their first hour. He turned, rake in hand, and remembered to lower his eyes a beat too late. "Miss?" "Her Grace wishes to go to the lake, and Mrs. Felden wishes her to die of a chill indoors first, and the 2 wishes have reached an impasse that requires a 3rd party of no opinion and considerable arms." "You have considerable arms." Clara looked at him, frankly, the way she looked at everything, as though appraising a horse she could not afford. "You also have a footman's coat and a fencing master's shoulders, and a way of standing as though you expect a room to arrange itself around you. And I have not decided what to make of that.
so I shall make nothing of it for now. Bring the chair with the cane seat. Mind the wheel, it sticks." She turned and walked back toward the house, and Nathaniel stood holding the rake, with the curious sensation of a man who has spent his whole life being read by people who flatter their reading, and has just, for the first time, been read by someone who did not care whether the reading pleased him. He brought the chair. He minded the wheel.
He admitted to the hedge, in some difficulty. The trouble with watching a person, Clara had always found, was that a person watched back. Not all of them, of course. Mrs. Felden did not watch, she accounted. Sturgis, the under-butler, did not watch. He supervised. The other servants moved through the house at the particular angle of people who have learned that to be seen is to be given more work. And Clara, who had been one of them in spirit, if not in livery, these 2 years, knew the angle and respected it. But the tall one watched. John. He watched her the way a man watches a chess problem he has set himself, and the watching would have offended her. She had been the object of a great deal of male attention since misfortune had stripped her of the protection of a name, almost none of it kind, except that there was nothing in it she could name as appetite. He watched as if he were trying to solve her, as if she were a contradiction he could not file. Which was rich, Clara thought, considering the silver. She had seen it on the 3rd day, when she came down early to fetch the dowager's shawl, and found the new footman in the breakfast room with the canteen open, counting the place settings against a list, and he had counted them in a murmur, and the murmur had numbers in it the way an educated man's numbers came. Primus, secundus. No, that was her own ear inventing Latin. But the rhythm of him counting was the rhythm of a man who had been taught to count by a tutor and not by a butler. Considering the books, she had found a volume of Tacitus left open on the bench by the boot room, face down, spine cracked at a passage on the corruption of provincial governors, and no footman in England read Tacitus on his half-hour. And when she had picked it up and turned to put it on the shelf, John had come in, seen it in her hand, and gone perfectly still, a stillness so complete and so quickly mastered that it told her more than a confession. Considering the way he said her name, or rather, the way he did not. He said Miss, with a small downward inflection, the way a gentleman says it to a woman he has not yet been introduced to and means to be, not the flat Miss of a man whose whole world is below the green baize door. She did not know what he was. She knew what he was not, which was a footman from the Hartfield house, because she had, God forgive her, she had so little and she could not afford to be wrong, written a careful, idle, gossiping letter to a school friend married into Hartfield's county, and the friend had written back that the Hartfields had let no man go that spring, and had never, in living memory, employed a John. So, he was someone, wearing nobody's coat, in a house whose master was conveniently absent, watching the master's blind mother and the master's mother's companion. Clara was very frightened, for one entire afternoon. Then she was not, because she did the sum the dowager had taught her, putting a person together out of pieces, and the pieces did not add to a thief, or a seducer, or a spy. They added to a man who carried coal he plainly resented carrying, who had wept. She had seen it, his face turned to the hedge, when an old blind woman lifted her face to the rain, who had brought the cane chair and minded the wheel that stuck without being told twice, and who watched the dowager when he thought no one saw him, with an expression Clara had only ever seen on one kind of face in her life, the face of a son. She did not say it aloud. She was a woman with 11 shillings. 11 still, for she had not been paid, and a position, and no protector. And she had learned that what you know is a coin, and you do not spend it until you must. But she watched him back, after that, with a different question. Not, who are you? But what are you doing here, in that coat, to these people you so plainly love? And the dowager, who heard everything, heard the change in the room when the two of them were in it,
and said nothing, and smiled her small, unreadable smile into the fire.
The first open skirmish came over a teacup. It was a Sèvres cup, soft paste, the blue of a particular sky, with a chip on the rim the size of a barley corn, and the dowager would drink from no other. Mrs. Felden had been trying to retire it for a year.
"It is chipped, Your Grace. It is not fit."
And the dowager had been refusing for a year, and on the 5th day of Clara's tenure, the matter came to a head, because a new under-housemaid, not knowing the law of the house, washed the cup and set it on the high shelf in the still-room, with the chip turned to the wall, and the dowager, reaching for her tea after breakfast, was given a whole cup, a perfect cup, a stranger's cup, and set it down so hard the saucer cracked. "This is not my cup." "It is a better cup, Your Grace." "It is not my cup. My cup has a chip. I put my lip to the chip. I have put my lip to the chip every morning for 9 years, and I know the morning by it, the way you know it by the window you cannot imagine doing without. Bring me my cup." "Your Grace, the chipped one is below, in the still-room, and the girl has—" "Then send someone with arms and a candle to the still-room," said the dowager, in a voice that had silenced a dining table of statesmen in its day. "And have my cup." It was John who went. Clara watched him go, sent by Mrs. Felden, with a jerk of the head, the way one sends the newest and least, and she watched him come back after a quarter of an hour, with the chipped cup washed and warmed, and the chip turned to where the dowager's right hand would find it, because he had set it down. Clara saw this, saw it and understood it whole. With the chip at 4 o'clock from the handle, which was exactly where a right-handed drinker's lip would seek it, which was a thing you could only know if you had watched this particular woman drink from this particular cup for years. The dowager's fingers found the chip. Her whole body eased. "Thank you, John," she said, and then, lightly, as though remarking on the weather, "You turned the chip to my hand. How did you know which hand?" A silence. Clara, with her embroidery, did not look up, and looked up with every other sense she had. "I watched you take it yesterday, Your Grace," said John. "Did you?" The dowager lifted the cup and drank. "What an observant young man you are. The last 3 companions could not have told you which hand I favor, and they had eyes." She set the cup down, by herself, surely, by feel, and yet her hand went to the saucer's edge, as though she knew to the inch where the footman had left it. "You will go far, John. Mind you go far away from this house, in time. It is no place for a clever man to spend himself carrying coal." "I am content with the coal, Your Grace." "No one is content with coal," said the dowager. "But it is a polite thing to say to an old woman, and you are polite, which is rarer than clever and worth more. Clara, read to me. The thing about Venice. He may stay and listen, if Mrs. Felden can spare him, which she cannot, but she will, because I have asked." And Mrs. Felden, who could refuse the dowager nothing, and resented every refusal she could not make, jerked her head at John, and John took up a place by the door, and Clara read about Venice. And over the top of the page, she watched a footman listen to Petrarch, with his eyes closed, and his ruined gloves folded behind his back. And she thought, "There, that is the face. That is the son's face." And she said nothing, and turned the page, and her voice did not change, though something in her chest had begun, very quietly, and against all her interest and judgment, to— "You read well," John said to her, afterward, in the corridor, the two of them alone in the long gallery, where the departed Vanes hung in their frames and pretended not to listen. He had carried out the tea things, and she had carried out the shawl, and they had met in the dim, between the morning room and the still room stair. "I read accurately," said Clara. "Well is a matter of opinion. Her Grace prefers accuracy, and so do I.
so we suit." She studied him in the grey gallery light. Behind his head, on the wall, hung a portrait of a dark-haired man in garter robes, perhaps 30, with a hard, handsome jaw and a way of standing as though he expected the room to arrange itself around him. And Clara looked at the painted man, and looked at the footman, and the footman saw her look, and for one held breath, neither of them said the thing that was suddenly, hugely, in the air between them. "That is the present Duke," said John evenly. "Is Grace of Calderwood, painted at his majority. He is in the north." "Is he?" said Clara. "He has your shoulders." "Footmen are chosen for their shoulders, miss. We are bought by the inch, like ribbon." "And your jaw?" "A great many men have a jaw." "And," said Clara very softly, because she was frightened again, and being frightened made her reckless. "He has, I should think, a mother who has gone blind in the years since that picture was painted, and a footman newly come to wait on her, who reads Tacitus on his half-hour, and weeps in the lilac walk, and knows which hand she drinks with. I have 11 shillings, John. I will tell you exactly what I am worth, because it is so little that I cannot afford to be wrong, and I cannot afford to be turned off, and I cannot afford to be the sort of woman who knows a dangerous thing and pretends she does not. So I am going to ask you once, in this gallery, where the only listeners are painted and discreet. Who are you, and what are you doing to that good old woman in her own house? The footman looked at her for a long moment. And then the Duke of Calderwood, against every plan he had made and every reason he had for keeping his counsel, told her the truth, or began to, the first edge of it, because Clara Ainsworth had 11 shillings, and looked at him as though that made her more honest than every titled creature he had ever bargained with, and he found, to his own astonishment, that he could not lie to her in this gallery, under the painted eye of the man he was. "Not here," he said. "Not now. Sturgis will come along this corridor in 2 minutes. He always does at the half-hour. Tonight, after her grace is abed. The library, the small one, the cold one, where no one goes. I will tell you who I am, Miss Ainsworth, and you will despise me, and you will be right to. And then I will ask you to keep my counsel for 1 week longer, for my mother's sake and not for mine. Will you come?" Clara should have said no. A woman with 11 shillings did not meet strange men in cold libraries after the house was abed. She knew the rules. She had survived 2 years by them. "I will come," she said. "Mind the wheel of the chair before then. It still sticks." The small library was cold, as he had promised, and dark but for the single branch of candles he had lit, and the fire he had, clumsily, getting it wrong twice, swearing under his breath in a way no footman swore, coaxed into a sullen glow. Clara came at 11 by the back stair, in her bronze-green wool with a shawl over it, and she stood just inside the door with her hand on the latch, the way a sensible woman stands, with her retreat behind her. "Well," she said. "Tell me. I have left the door open, and Mrs. Felden sleeps light, and I scream remarkably loud for a clergyman's daughter. So let us both proceed in the comfort of those facts." "You will not need to scream." He set down the poker. He had taken off the plum coat. He stood in his shirt and the footman's waistcoat, and without the coat, he was unmistakably the man on the gallery wall, and he saw her see it, and he did not look away. "My name is Nathaniel Vane. I am the 8th Duke of Calderwood. The man in the north buying a hunter is a fiction. The man you have watched carry coal for 5 days is me." Clara did not move. She had known. She had assembled him out of pieces and known, and yet to hear it said plainly in a cold room was another thing, and she felt the floor of her small, ordered survival tilt under her. "Why?" she said. "Because my mother is blind, and rich, and alone but for the servants I pay, and the relatives who count the days, and a companion was coming to live at her elbow, hired on a letter, recommended by a woman I had never met. A companion learns a person's habits, her hours, her fears, the cup she favors and the hand she favors it with. He said it steadily, and Clara heard, under the steadiness, the shape of an old fear worn smooth by handling. 3 years ago, a man my mother trusted, her own man of business, in the chair by her fire as you sit now, moved £4,000 of her settlement into a venture that did not exist, because a blind woman signs where her hand is guided and trusts the voice that guides it. I caught it. Barely. I have not, since, been able to make myself hand her over to a stranger on the strength of a letter and a recommendation. So I came to watch the stranger, as furniture. No one performs for furniture.
Miss Ainsworth, I wanted to see you when you did not know you were seen. And what did you see? Said Clara. Her voice was very even. It cost her a great deal to keep it even. I saw a woman who lets a blind duchess spill her own tea rather than rob her of the dignity of pouring it. I saw a woman stand my mother in the rain because the rain was better than the resentment. I saw a woman who turned the Tacitus over to put it back on the shelf and did not, afterward, use what she had guessed to her advantage, though she had every advantage to gain and 11 shillings to gain it with. He stopped. You wrote to Hartfield. I saw the letter go. I knew the moment it went out that you would learn there is no John, and I've spent 2 days waiting for you to use it, to come to me, or to my mother, or to Mrs. Veldon, with the dangerous thing in your hand, and ask a price for keeping it quiet. It is what I expected. It is what I came here braced to find. And instead, I asked you in a gallery. And instead, you asked me in a gallery whether I meant my own mother harm. Nathaniel Vane, 8th Duke of Calderwood, looked at the companion with 11 shillings, and his hard jaw was not steady now. Do you know how long it has been since anyone in my life asked me a question to which the true answer cost me something, and waited for it, and did not first calculate what my answer was worth to them? You shame me, Miss Ainsworth. You have shamed me for 5 days, and you did not know you were doing it, which is the only kind of shame worth a damn. The fire cracked. Somewhere above them the old house settled on its bones. This is a great deal, said Clara at last, to lay on a woman with 11 shillings at 11 o'clock at night. And, because she was frightened, and the fright had nowhere to go, and the man before her had just turned out to be both the most powerful person she had ever stood alone with, and the most undone. She laughed. It came out of her before she could stop it, helpless and astonished, and after a horrified instant, she saw the corner of his mouth go. And then the Duke of Calderwood was laughing too, in his shirt-sleeves in a cold library, the pair of them, at nothing, at everything, at the sheer impossible architecture of the situation, until Clara had to put her hand over her mouth for fear of waking the house. Forgive me, she gasped. It is only, you carried the coal so badly. I watched you carry it. You held the scuttle as though it had insulted you. It had, repeatedly. He wiped his eyes with the back of a ruined glove. Sturgis says I am willing but soft, and he will harden me or lose me. Sturgis is right. Sturgis is entirely right, and does not know he is correcting his master. And I have never in my life been corrected so usefully or so often as I have been this week by men who do not know who I am. He sobered slowly, the laughter draining to something quieter and more dangerous. 1 week, Miss Ainsworth. That is what I came to ask. My cousin, Sir Hugh, is coming on the 17th. He is my heir, while I am unmarried, and he takes a close interest in my mother's health and my own continued bachelorhood, in roughly that order of affection. He has wanted my mother declared unfit for a year, so that her estate falls under a trustee of his choosing, which would be himself. If he learns the Duke is in his own house dressed as a footman, he will have all the proof of family madness he requires,
and he will use it against her as much as against me. Give me until he comes and goes. Keep John alive a week longer. After that, I will put on my own coat, and you may despise me at your leisure, and from a position of perfect safety, with a quarter's wages in your hand and a character in your pocket, whatever you decide." Clara was quiet for a long moment. The candle flames bent. The cold of the room had got into her shawl. "I do not despise you," she said. "That is the inconvenient truth, Your Grace, and I would much rather despise you, because a woman in my position cannot afford the alternative. I will keep your John alive a week, not for your sake, for hers. She is the best company I've had since my father's table emptied, and I will not have a grasping cousin put her in a trustee's keeping, while I stand by with a secret in my pocket I might have spent to stop it. But understand me." She lifted her chin, and in the candlelight she was, the Duke thought, the most beautiful thing he had ever been afraid of. "When the week is out and you put on your coat, I go back to being a woman with 11 shillings, and you go back to being a man with 40,000 a year, and the gallery and the cold library and the carrying of coal will be a thing that happened to 2 other people. I will not be your romance, Your Grace. I have watched what becomes of companions who let themselves be a great man's spring diversion. I have 11 shillings and my own good name, and the name is the more valuable by a distance. So, we are allies for a week. We are nothing for a week. Are we agreed?" "We are agreed," said the Duke, who had never in his life agreed to anything he intended less to honor. The week that followed was, the Duke of Calderwood would think for the rest of his life, the happiest of it, and the most secret, and the most absurd. They conspired. That was the shape of it. The 2 of them, the Duke footman and the companion, drawn into a single, quiet alliance against the absurdity of his disguise and the approaching shadow of his cousin. And an alliance is a near and a perilous thing, for it requires 100 small private exchanges a day, 100 looks across a room that mean, "Keep your countenance," and "Not yet," and "Now." And there is no faster way to fall than to share a secret with someone you ought not to share a hedge with. She covered for him. When he set a tray down like a swordsman, she would say, before Mrs. Felden could mark it, "John, take the heavy end of the screen to the window. You are the only one of us with arms," and give him a thing to carry that justified the shoulders. When his hands, too soft, Sturgis had said it, and it was true, gave him away in the polishing, she taught him, in stolen minutes in the still room, the actual trick of it. Leather and rouge and the figure of 8, her own competent ink-stained fingers over his. And neither of them spoke while she did it, and both of them were entirely too aware of the silence. The still room smelled of beeswax and vinegar and the cold stone of the floor. Rain ticked at the one high window. The rouge stained their fingertips a soft rust that would not wash off till morning. His knuckles were warm under hers. The single tallow candle hissed and guttered and threw their 2 shadows long and unsteady up the whitewashed wall. And Clara watched the shadows so that she need not watch the man, and watched the man in the shadows instead, which was worse. He learned her in return, the way she had been learning the dowager, out of pieces. That she hid bread in her napkin and gave it to the kitchen cat, who was nobody's and therefore hers. That she had 3 handkerchiefs, and one was her mother's, and she did not use it, only carried it. That she could not abide a door left ajar, and would cross a room to close it, a small tyranny she was unaware of, and that he began, helplessly, ridiculously, closing doors before she reached them, so that he might watch her notice the room set right, and not know who had set it. And they made the dowager laugh. That was the 3rd strand of it, and the strongest. For the old woman, who heard everything, plainly heard the 2 of them, heard the alliance, heard the banter that ran under the service like a stream under ice. And instead of suspecting it, she fed it. She sent John on errands that required Clara's help. She demanded to be read to, and demanded the footman be allowed to stay and listen, and demanded, one afternoon, that John be taught to play backgammon, since Clara cheats and I require a second victim. And so the three of them sat, an evening, a blind duchess and a companion and a duke in a footman's waistcoat, throwing dice by the fire, and the dowager won every game by listening to the dice fall and counting, and accused them both of cheating, and was happier, Clara thought, than a woman robbed of her sight and half her settlement and most of her friends had any right to be. The fire popped and sank to a red glow. The dice clicked warm out of the leather cup and rattled across the board. The room smelled of wood smoke and the bowl of forced hyacinths on the side table, and the faint tallow of the snuffed candles by the door. Outside the long windows, the spring dark pressed close and wet against the glass. And inside, the three of them sat in a small gold circle of firelight. And none of them, for that one evening, was lonely. "You are good for her," the Duke said one evening on the back stair, the two of them passing in the narrow dark, his arms full of the supper tray, and hers full of the dowager's shawl, and the stair so narrow that they had to turn sideways, and even so his shoulder brushed hers, and neither of them, this time, stepped back. "You are good for her," said Clara. "You, the sun. She has come alive this week, and it is not me, John, whatever you tell yourself. It is the sound of you in the house. She turns toward you when you come into a room. She does not know she does it." Clara looked up at him in the dark of the stair, very close, too close. "She does not know it is you, and yet she knows it is you. I cannot make the sum come right, and it troubles me. Move your arm, Your Grace. Your tray is dripping gravy on my one good gown, and I cannot afford another." He moved his arm. He did not move otherwise. The stair held them both in its narrow dark for one more breath than was wise. "When the week is out," he said, low, and I put on my coat. "When the week is out," said Clara. "We are nothing. We agreed. Mind the gravy." She went up. He went down. Both of them, in the dark, smiled at the wall, and neither would have admitted it under torture. What neither of them knew, what Clara would not learn for 2 more days, and the Duke not until it was nearly too late, was that the Dowager Duchess of Calderwood had known her son for a footman from the moment he set down the first tray. She had known him in the first hour. She had known him the way she knew the morning by the chip in her cup, by means the sighted had grown too lazy to use. She knew his tread. She had heard it learn to walk. A mother's ear does not unlearn a son's weight on a floor. She knew his breath when he was holding his temper. She knew the particular way he cleared his throat before he lied, and he had cleared it before, "John, Your Grace, on from the Hartfield house," and her heart had turned over in her breast, and she had said nothing, because she understood her son, and she understood at once and exactly why he had come. He had come because he loved her, and did not trust the world with her. He had come in a servant's coat to stand between his blind mother and a stranger, the great, stubborn, loving fool, and she would no more have given him away than she would have torn out her own clouded eyes. But she had watched. She who could not see watched harder than any of them, and what she had set herself to learn in that first week was the companion. Not whether the girl was a thief. Her son was watching for that, and her son, whatever his sins, had a good eye, even now. What the dowager set herself to learn was whether the girl was the one. Whether the woman the agency had sent by accident into this house at the exact hour her son had hidden himself in it was a woman worth her son. She put Clara together out of pieces, as she put everyone, and the pieces added to bread saved for a stray cat, and a mother's handkerchief carried and not used, and a refusal to flatter, and 11 shillings spent on no advantage when a fortune in blackmail sat in the girl's 2 hands, and a laugh in the gallery. She had heard it, 2 floors up, the night they met in the cold library. She heard everything. a laugh shared with a man she believed to be a footman, which meant the girl had laughed at the man and not the title, for she had not known the title then. And the Dowager Duchess, sitting blind by her fire while her son carried coal and the girl read her Petrarch, made up her mind a full week before either of the young fools below her made up theirs. She approved of the girl first. She only had to find the way to tell them so. Sir Hugh Vane arrived on the 15th, in the rain, 2 days early, in a curricle he could not afford, pulled by horses he had not paid for, with his man of business, Mr. Grimsby, riding behind, and he came up the drive of Calderwood Hall with the particular satisfaction of a man arriving early precisely to catch a house unprepared. He very nearly caught it, for it was John who was sent out into the rain to hand him down, Sturgis being engaged, and the new man being nearest the door. And so the Duke of Calderwood, in plum-coloured livery and a footman's gloves, found himself holding the umbrella over the head of the cousin who wanted his mother declared mad and his own self childless and gone. And Sir Hugh, stepping down, looked at the footman holding the umbrella with the idle contempt of a man looking at a tool, and did not know him. Did not know him. 11 years of Christmases, of shooting parties, of family dinners where Hugh had measured the Duke's health with his eyes and counted the years to his inheritance. And Hugh stepped down out of the curricle, looked his cousin full in the face, and saw a footman, because the coat told him footman, and Sir Hugh Vane had never in his life looked past a coat at the man inside it. "You," he said, "take the bags. Mind a small case, it has papers. Where's the under-butler? Tell him Sir Hugh is come, and tell my aunt— No, do not tell my aunt. I shall surprise my dear aunt." And he smiled, and went up the steps, and did not give the footman with the umbrella a second glance. And the Duke of Calderwood stood in the rain, holding his cousin's small case of papers, and thought, with a cold clarity that the week of coal had taught him, "He means her harm, and he means it now, and I am wearing the one coat in England that lets me watch him do it." He carried the small case in. He did not quite give it to Grimsby. He set it down in the hall by the lilac jars, where the wet plum of his sleeve hid it, and he marked the room it went to, and he found Clara on the gallery stair, and said 3 words as he passed. "Hugh, 2 days. Now." And Clara's face went white and then went still, and she went up to the Dowager, and the Duke went down to the servants' hall to be a footman a few hours longer, and the trap of the next 48 hours closed quietly around them all. Sir Hugh was a careful man, in the way that weak men are careful, which is to say he prepared his ground. Over dinner that night, the Dowager at the head of her own table, Sir Hugh at her right, Clara at her left, and footmen at the wall, one of them the master of the house standing motionless with a napkin over his arm. Hugh laid his first stones. "You are looking tired, aunt," he said, with great tenderness carving. "Forgive me, one worries. A house this size and you not able to— that is, and only servants and a hired companion to mind you. One worries that things might be got past you, that advantage might be taken." "Advantage is taken of me hourly, Hugh," said the Dowager pleasantly. "Clara takes the last of the seed cake and tells me there was none. Mrs. Felden waters the small beer and tells me it is the brewer. I am robbed blind, as it were, on every side, and I find I prefer it to being managed. Is that pheasant? It smells underdone. John— yes, you, the tall one. Is the pheasant underdone?" A silence. Clara did not breathe. "It is a little underdone at the bone, your grace," said the footman by the wall, "though the breast is well enough." "There," said the Dowager, "an honest man. They are commoner below stairs than above, Hugh, in my experience. Sit down, John. You make the room nervous standing there like a caryatid. No, fetch the other decanter first. The cellar will not have sent up the good one with company in the house. They save it, the wretches, thinking I cannot tell. I can tell. Bring up the 89. You will find it behind the door on the 3rd bin, which you will know, John, because you are observant, and I am told observant young men go far." And she turned her clouded eyes, smiling, toward the wall where her son stood with a napkin over his arm, and Sir Hugh, carving, missed it entirely. But Clara did not, and the Duke did not, and a small cold thread of understanding went through the Duke, that he could not, at the table, stop to follow. She knew. The thought arrived whole. His mother knew which bin held the 89, knew it was a thing only the house's master knew it, and had set it as a question to a footman across a dinner table in front of the cousin who wanted her certified mad, and had done it smiling. But there was no time to follow the thread, because that night the trap sprang. Clara woke at 2 by the sound of a door. She who could not abide a door ajar woke to the click of one being opened with great care, 3 rooms off, the muniment room where the dowager's papers were kept, and she was up and into her wool and out before she had decided to be, a candle shielded in her hand, because a woman with 11 shillings sleeps lightly and trusts her own ear. The muniment room door stood open. Mr. Grimsby was inside, with a dark lantern and the dowager's despatch box open before him, and a paper half drawn out. And Sir Hugh stood at the window with his back to the door, murmuring, "The settlement man, the original, not the copy. The original has her signature, and the witness is long in his grave, and I can have a second deed drawn in a week that says the trust was always meant to." "It says nothing of the kind," said Clara from the doorway, with her candle up and her voice perfectly clear. "And you will put it back, Sir Hugh, this instant, or I shall wake the house." 2 men in a dark room turned to look at one woman in a doorway. It was, Clara would think afterward, the most frightened she had ever been, and the most certain. Sir Hugh recovered first. He was good at recovering. It was the only thing weakness had taught him to be good at. "The companion," he said, smiling. "Of course. Up in the night, in your shift, in a room of locked papers. How fortunate I am here to witness it. The agency sends a clergyman's pauper daughter to a blind woman's elbow, and is the house surprised when the papers walk? You have made my case for me, my girl, more neatly than I could have hoped. Grimsby, wake my aunt, wake the under-butler. Let them find the thieving companion in the muniment room with the dispatch box open, and we shall see whose word a magistrate." "Wake the whole house," said a voice from behind Clara, low and even and absolutely without fear. "By all means, Hugh. I should like them all to see this." And the Duke of Calderwood came forward out of the dark of the corridor into the candlelight, in his shirt-sleeves and his footman's waistcoat, with his own face on, and his cousin, Sir Hugh Vane, looked at the footman who had held his umbrella in the rain, and saw, at last, 11 years too late, the man inside the coat, and went the colour of tallow. "Nathaniel," he whispered. "Sir Hugh." The Duke walked into the room and took the half-drawn settlement out of Grimsby's slack hand, and looked at it, and put it back in the box, and closed the box. "You will be glad to know your aunt is not mad. The footman you have ordered about for an evening, the one who told you honestly that your pheasant was underdone, is her son, in his own house, who came home in a borrowed coat to find out whether the new companion meant his mother harm." He set his hand flat on the closed box. "I have my answer. She does not. You do. You have always done, Hugh, and I have always known it, and I have let it lie because you are my own kin, and a man does not like to think his own kin would rob his mother in the dark. I shall not have the luxury of not thinking it any longer. You, in that coat, you have been spying on your own family." "I have been carrying coal," said the Duke, "and learning what my servants endure for the wage I set, and watching a woman with 11 shillings to her name decline to blackmail me when she held the means.
while you, with an income and a name and a curricle you have not paid for, crept into a blind woman's papers at 2 a.m. Do not speak to me of family, Hugh. You will leave at first light. Grimsby will leave with you. And the original settlement, with my mother's true signature, goes tonight into the hands of her own solicitor, with a letter from me, so that should anything ever befall the trust, the chain of custody will hang from your neck and not from hers. He looked at his cousin without heat. I am being merciful. I am being merciful because there is a blind old woman asleep upstairs who would weep to see a vein taken up by the law, and I will spare her that. Be grateful for her, Hugh. She is the only thing standing between you and the ruin you have earned. Now get out of her papers. So Hugh got out of her papers. It should have ended there. In a better ordered world, it would have ended there. The villain routed, the papers safe, the Duke unmasked in the right way at the right hour, the companion vindicated with a candle in her hand. But the human heart does not order itself for the convenience of justice, and the cruelty Sir Hugh Vane could not work upon the estate. He worked, in the last, upon the 2 people in the room who had bested him, because a cornered weak man, denied the large wound, will always reach for the small one. He was at the door, with Grimsby gathering the lantern, when he turned. He looked at Clara, at her white face and her steady candle, and her one good gown thrown over her shift. And he looked at his cousin the Duke, standing close beside her, with his hand still on the box. And Sir Hugh Vane smiled, because he had found, in the wreck of his scheme, one stone left to throw. Tell me, Nathaniel, he said, does she know, your little pauper, does she know the whole of it, that you did not come to watch a stranger, you came to test her, that every kindness this week was a wager you set yourself? You told me so at Christmas, do you not recall, in your cups? I will hire no companion I have not first watched, believe herself unwatched. You laid a trap of livery and lilac and a blind mother's loneliness, and you sat in it, and you watched this poor creature pour out her honesty to a footman she pitied, never dreaming the footman was the master grading her like a horse at Tattersall's. He turned his smile on Clara, and it was almost gentle, which was the worst of it. He has been your judge all week, my dear, not your friend. Every spilled cup you let his mother keep, he was scoring. Every honesty you spent, he was appraising it. You were never a person to him. You were an examination. And you passed, I make no doubt. You have the look of a girl who passes. But do not mistake a high mark for a heart. He will pin a quarter's wages to your character and send you down the same road you came up, and dine out for a season on the tale of the honest companion he tested in a footman's coat. Good night, aunt's pauper. You played your part beautifully. And Sir Hugh Vane went out into the dark with his lantern and his ruin, and left the small wound to do its work behind him. It did its work. Clara stood very still in the muniment room, with the candle burning down toward her fingers, and she did not look at the Duke. And the Duke said, Clara, that is not— And she heard the not, and did not wait for the rest, because the rest did not matter. The shape of the thing was already in her, settling, fitting, locking into place with the terrible click of a key that has found its lock. He had come to test her. It was true. She knew it was true because she had heard it from his own mouth, in the cold library on the first night. No one performs for furniture. I wanted to see you when you did not know you were seen. She had thought it a thing he had done before he knew her. She understood now that it was the whole of it, the frame around the week, the reason for every hour. She had been, from the carriage in the rain to the dice by the fire, a stranger he was grading. The umbrella held wrong, the cup turned to the right hand, the Petrarch, the backgammon, the gravy on the stair. A man had been scoring her the entire time, a great man, the greatest she had ever stood beside, and she had poured out to him the only thing she owned, her honesty, her unguarded self.
The laugh in the gallery she had given freely to a footman she pitied. And he had been weighing it, the whole while, against a standard she had not known she was being held to. She had been an examination. She had been a horse at Tattersall's. She had passed, and the passing was the worst of all, because it meant the kindness had been real enough to score, and never real enough to keep. He had made a study of her. He had worn a servant's coat to watch her trip, and she had obliged him by not tripping, and he had marked the not tripping in his ledger, and called it, perhaps, to himself, admiration. But you do not test a person you regard as your equal. You test a thing you are deciding whether to acquire. He had never seen her, only the examination. He had never wanted Clara Ainsworth. He had wanted to know whether the agency's pauper would steal. And she had not stolen. And now the examination was over, and she could go. She had told him she would not be his romance. She had told him, in the cold library, in the dark on the stair, "When the week is out, we are nothing." She had said it to protect herself, and she saw now, with a calm that was worse than weeping, that she had needed no protection, because there had never been anything to protect herself from. There had been no romance to refuse. There had only ever been a duke conducting an interview, and a fool of a companion who had begun, against all her judgment and all her interest and the whole weight of her 11 shillings, to imagine that the warmth in a borrowed library had been meant for her, and not for the file. "Put out your candle, Your Grace," she said. "It will burn your fingers. I have learned this week to mind such things for the people I wait upon." Her voice did not shake. She was proud, dimly, distantly, that it did not shake. "I am glad I passed. You may give Mrs. Felden my quarter's wages and a character. I will go down the road I came up, as Sir Hugh says, and I will not dine out on the tail, because I have no one to dine with, which you knew, having read me like the rest. Good night. I hope your mother keeps her settlement and her cup. They are the 2 best things in this house, and you very nearly let a cousin take the one, and a stranger keep the other. And the stranger, you will be relieved to learn, was honest after all. You may write it in your ledger. Honest. Full marks. Good night." And she walked out of the muniment room with her candle and her one good gown, past the man she would not look at, and went up the back stair to her cold room and sat on the edge of the narrow bed in the dark, and did not weep, because weeping was a thing you did when you had lost something, and she had decided, with the whole stubborn force of a woman who has survived 2 years on 11 shillings, that she had lost nothing, because she had never, at any hour, owned a single thing worth losing. She told herself so, until the window greyed. She did not, in the end, believe it, but she told herself so, and a person can live a long time on a thing she does not believe, if she tells it to herself in a steady enough voice. The Duke of Calderwood did not sleep at all. He stood in the muniment room until the candle Clara had not let him hold burned itself out in his own hand and stung him, and he welcomed the sting. And then he went down to the servants' hall in the grey before dawn, and took off the plum coat for the last time, and folded it, and laid it on the bench where Sturgis would find it. And he sat in his shirt-sleeves at the long deal table where he had eaten a week of servants' suppers. And he understood, slowly, in the cold, the full extent of what his cousin had done to him, with a single true sentence wrongly framed. For it was true. He had come to test her. He could not unmake the truth of it. It was the seed of the whole week, and it had been a contemptible seed, and he had known, even as he planted it, that there was something in it unworthy of a man who claimed to love honesty. He had dressed honesty as suspicion, and called it prudence. He had set a trap of livery and lilac, exactly as Hugh said, and a blind mother's loneliness had been the bait in it, and a clergyman's daughter with 11 shillings had walked into it, and been, every hour, more decent than the man who set it. And somewhere in the week the test had stopped. He could not have named the hour. Perhaps the gallery, perhaps the cold library, Perhaps the narrow stare with the gravy and the held breath. Perhaps the simple sight of her standing his mother in the rain. Somewhere, the grading had ended, and the loving had begun. And he had not marked the changeover, because he had been too happy to keep accounts. But Clara could not know that. Clara had only Hugh's frame. That the kindness had been a wager, and the warmth a file, and herself an examination. And the dreadful thing, the thing he sat with in the cold, was that he could not prove the changeover. There was no document for it. There was no settlement, no signature, no witness.
He had spent the week telling her in 100 small ways that he saw her, and now, when it mattered, he had nothing to show her but his word. And his word was the word of a man who had, by his own confession, worn a lie for a coat for a week. He could not buy his way out of this. That was the new and terrible arithmetic of it. He was a man with 40,000 a year and a seat in the Lords and 4 estates, and there was not, in the whole of it, a coin that would purchase back the thing he had broken. Because the thing he had broken was her belief that the warmth had been free. You cannot pay a person for proof that you were not pricing them. The very offer is the wound repeated. What was left to him, then, was the one currency he had spent the week pretending to do without. Not money. Cost. A real cost, paid in the one coin a duke hoards above all others, and a pauper cannot be given. His own standing, spent in public, in front of the people whose good opinion was the air he breathed, with no calculation of return. He sat in the cold, and he worked out what it would cost, and the sum was very high. And he found, somewhat to his surprise, that he was glad it was high, because a low cost would have been one more thing she could grade and find wanting. And then, because there was one person in the house who had known him for a footman from the first tray and said nothing, he went up, in the grey dawn, in his shirt-sleeves, and knocked at his mother's door. "Come in, Nathaniel," said the Dowager Duchess of Calderwood, who was awake and sitting up and had been waiting.
"Come in, and sit where the chair does not squeak, and tell me how badly you have managed it. I heard most of it. I hear everything. It is the only advantage they left me, and I have made it a good one. Sit. You have made the girl believe she was a wager. You knew me," he said, sitting. "From the first. The bin, the pheasant. You knew. I knew you, my dear, before you had your gloves on. I heard you cross the hall like a man who has never carried a tray in his life, which you have not. And I heard you clear your throat before you told me your name was John, which is the same throat you cleared before you told me, aged 9, that you had not been in the orchard with the apple still in your hand." Her clouded eyes found him with terrible accuracy. "I said nothing because I understood you. You came in a fool's coat to stand between me and the world, because you love me and do not trust the world with me. And you were right not to, Nathaniel. For the world sent Hugh to my papers at 2 in the morning, and the world also sent that girl, by the same blind accident, to my elbow. And one of the two was the worst thing the world has done to this house in a year, and the other was the best. And you, my clever, stupid son, have spent the night confusing them. She thinks... I know what she thinks. She thinks she was an examination. And the cruelty of it, my dear, the real cruelty, is that you began it as one. You cannot tell her you did not, because you did, and she will hear the lie in your throat the way I do, for she has learned to listen the way I listen. I've watched her do it all week. She reads a room the way I read one. She is the first person to come into this house since I went dark, who does not perform for me because she cannot be bothered. And you know what that is worth, Nathaniel, to a blind old woman. It is worth more than the settlement Hugh tried to steal. I made up my mind about her on the 3rd day. I approved of her before either of you knew your own hearts. I have only been waiting, this week, for the pair of you to be as clever as a blind woman. And you have disappointed me, and I'm too old to wait much longer. So I shall tell you what to do, and you shall do it, because I am your mother, and I cannot see, and you owe me that much." "Tell me," said the Duke. So she told him. And the Duke of Calderwood listened to his blind mother the way he had not listened to anyone in 11 years. And when she had finished, he took her dry, strong hand and put his face against it, the way he had as a boy. And she felt that his jaw was not steady, and she was satisfied. "Now go," she said. "And Nathaniel, wear your own coat. She has had quite enough of the other one. And bring lilac." She stopped in the hall to smell it on the first day. A woman who stops for lilac in the rain is a woman who has decided to go on living in spite of her circumstances. And that, my dear, is the only quality in a wife that has ever, in the end, mattered. Now go. I shall have my tea. Send up the chipped cup. And send the Duke. It is time I met him." Clara was packed by 8. It did not take long. A woman with 11 shillings travels light. Her whole life went into the one box that had come up the drive with her, the 3 handkerchiefs, the recut gown she stood in, the bronze-green wool brushed and folded, her father's sermons that no one would ever read again and she could not leave behind.
She made her bed with the corners square, because she had been raised to leave a room better than she found it. And she went down the back stair with her box, and she did not go to the morning room to say goodbye to the dowager, because she could not. Because that goodbye was the one thing in the house that would break the steady voice she had been keeping herself alive with since 2 in the morning. And she had a road to walk, and a steady voice was the only thing she had to walk it with. She went out by the garden door to avoid the hall and the lilac, and the garden door let her out by the lilac walk, which she had forgotten, and she stopped. She could not help it. Her body stopped before her will could forbid it, in the white and purple drift of it, in the wet morning, exactly where she had stood the dowager a week before, and said there, "Now you are in it, not beside it." And the Duke of Calderwood was standing in the lilac walk, in his own coat, with an armful of cut lilac dripping in his arms, waiting for her, because his mother had told him she would come this way, because his mother knew the girl would not be able to face the morning room, because his mother, blind, knew the whole geography of 2 hearts better than either heart knew itself. Clara stopped. She set down her box. "Your Grace," she said, "I am leaving by the garden to spare us both the hall. You need not have come. The character and the wages may be sent after me to the receiving inn. I find I would rather not." "I have not come to give you a character," said the Duke. "I have come to give you the truth, and I have come to give it to you in the one way you cannot grade, which is at a cost to me you can see with your own eyes. Will you let me before you walk? You owe me nothing. I am asking it as a debt I owe you, and not as one you owe me." Clara looked at him. The lilac dripped. His arms were full of it, and he looked, she thought distantly, absurd. A duke in his proper coat holding a hedge. And her treacherous heart turned over at the absurdity, exactly as it had turned over at a footman who carried coal badly. And she hated it for turning. And it turned anyway. "Say it then," she said. "But say it quickly. The inn coach goes at noon, and I have 11 shillings and no margin for the next one." "You will not need the coach," he said. "But I will say it quickly, because you have asked me to, and because I have learned this week that you mean exactly what you say, which is the rarest thing I have ever encountered, and I was too great a fool to know its worth until I had broken it." He took a breath. "Hugh told you the truth. I came to test you. I will not stand in this lilac and tell you I did not, because you would hear the lie in my throat, as my mother hears every lie in mine, and I will not begin the truth with a lie. I came to test you. I dressed suspicion as prudence, and a blind woman's loneliness was the bait, and you were the quarry. And it was contemptible, And I knew it was contemptible while I did it. And I did it anyway, because I've lived 11 years among people who want something from me, and I had forgotten there was any other kind. And so I treated the first honest person I had met in a decade as a problem to be solved, instead of a soul to be met. That is the truth. That is the whole shameful truth, and I will not soften one corner of it for you.
Then we are agreed, said Clara. And I may go.
I have not finished. You asked me to be quick. This is me being quick, for me. Hold the lilac. And he put the whole dripping armful of it into her arms, so that she had to take it or let it fall, and her hands closed on the wet stems before her pride could stop them, and the scent of it came up around them both. There, now your hands are full, and you cannot leave without setting it down, and I have bought myself 30 seconds, which is a low trick, and I am not above low tricks where you are concerned, I have discovered. Here is the part Hugh did not know, because Hugh cannot conceive of it, because it has never happened to Hugh, and it had never happened to me. Somewhere in the week, Clara, the test ended. I cannot tell you the hour. I have sat up all night trying to find the hour, and I cannot, because I was too happy to keep the account. Perhaps it was the gallery. Perhaps it was the cup turned to my mother's hand. Perhaps it was a sentence you said on a stair about gravy. Somewhere the grading stopped, and I began, simply, to wait for the sound of you in a room. To close doors before you reached them, so I might watch you find the room set right. To carry coal an hour longer than Sturgis required, because the coal was in the same house as you, and my own bed was not. I stopped testing you, Clara, and I did not notice I had stopped, the way a man does not notice the moment a fever breaks, and only knows after that he is well. He shifted the lilac in his arms. So I will say the rest of it plainly, here, with my hands as full of it as yours. Marry me, not the companion I came to grade. You, who graded me back and found me soft, and were right. Be my wife. You cannot prove it, said Clara, and her voice was not steady now, and she hated that too. That is the trouble with what you are saying, Your Grace. You are a clever man, and it is a clever thing to say, and there is not one word of it I can hold to the light. A wager looks exactly like a courtship from the inside, when the man is clever enough. You ask me to take your word, and your word is the word of a man who wore a lie for a coat for a week. And I have 11 shillings, and I cannot afford to be wrong about this. I cannot. It would cost me the only thing I have, which is the knowledge that I have never once made myself a fool for a man's convenience. You ask too much on too little surety. Take back your lilac. I am sorry. I am going to the noon coach. I cannot prove it with words, the Duke agreed. You are entirely right. Words are the coin I have spent all week debasing, and I have no credit left in them with you, and I deserve to have none. So I shall not prove it with words. I shall prove it the only way a thing like this can be proved, which is with a cost, paid in front of witnesses, with no return possible to me. Come. Come where? To the hall, where the household is gathered, because I have gathered them. Sturgis and Mrs. Felden, and the under-housemaids, and the boy who blacks the boots, and the grooms in from the stable. Every soul who has called me John this week, and ordered me about, and corrected me, and never known they were correcting their master. They are all in the hall, Clara, waiting, because I have asked my mother to have them brought. And you are going to stand in the lilac for one more moment, while I tell you what I am about to do, so that you understand it is for the witnesses and not for you. Because a thing done for you, you would grade, and rightly. But a thing done in front of 40 servants, at a cost I can never recover, that you cannot call a wager. Because no man wagers his own standing in his own hall for a girl he is merely grading. And the Duke of Calderwood took Clara Ainsworth, with her arms full of lilac, into the great hall of Calderwood Hall,
where the whole household stood gathered and murmuring among the lilac jars. And Sir Hugh Vane stood by the door with Grimsby, not yet departed, halted on his way out by a duke's command, to witness the one thing he had not foreseen. The Duke let go of Clara's arm in the centre of the hall, and stepped up onto the first stair where all could see him, and raised his voice. His lord's voice, Clara thought, the one she had guessed at in a footman's throat a week ago. And he said, "I have something to say to my household, and I will say it once, and you may carry it where you like, for I will not have it whispered as though it were a shame to be hidden. For 7 days I have lived among you as a footman. You called me John. You set me to carry coal and polish silver and stand at the wall through dinners I was not given to eat. And you did it because you believed me your equal in service. And I let you believe it. And I deceived every honest one of you. And I am sorry for it. Mr. Sturgis," he found the under-butler in the crowd, "you told me I was willing but soft, and you would harden me or lose me. You were correcting your master, and you did not know it. And it was the truest and most useful word I have had from any man in 11 years. And I thank you, and I am ashamed to have earned it under a false name." A sound went through the hall, a kind of indrawn breath, 40 people understanding at once. "I deceived you for a reason I believed was good," the Duke went on, "which was to guard my mother. But in the guarding, I did a thing that was not good. I took the most honest person to enter this house in a decade, Miss Ainsworth, whom you know, who waits upon my mother, and I made of her, without her knowing it, an examination. I watched her believe herself unwatched. I graded her honesty as a man grades a horse. My cousin Sir Hugh, who stands there by the door, told her so last night, and meant it as a cruelty, and it was a cruelty, and it was also true, and I will not stand in my own hall and pretend a true thing is false to spare myself." He turned on the stair and looked down at Clara, standing alone in the centre of the hall with her arms full of dripping lilac, and her face white, and her eyes, at last, not steady at all. "Miss Ainsworth holds that I cannot prove the test became something else. She is right that I cannot prove it with words. So I will prove it with a cost, here, in front of every soul whose good opinion is the only fortune a man in my position truly owns. Here is the cost." He drew a breath, and Clara saw that his hard jaw was not steady, that the great Duke of Calderwood, in his own hall, in his own coat, was as undone as the man who had wept at a hedge. "I, Nathaniel Vane, Duke of Calderwood, stand in front of my household and tell them that I behaved this week with less honour than my own footman, less honour than the under-butler who corrected me, less honour by a long road than a companion with 11 shillings who held the means to ruin me and would not spend it. I tell them that I have asked that companion to be my wife, and that she has refused me, and that she was right to refuse me, because I had given her a wager and called it a courtship. And I tell them that I am asking her again, now, before all of you, knowing she may refuse me again before all of you, and that I will bear that refusal in this hall, in front of every face I command, because a man does not risk public refusal for a thing he is grading. He risks it only for a thing he loves. I am spending my pride, Clara, in the one market where it cannot be bought back. It is all I have that you cannot weigh and find counterfeit. It is yours, spent, gone, whatever you answer. Marry me or do not, but you cannot, after this, call it a wager, for no man wagers this." The hall was utterly silent, and into the silence, from the top of the stair, came another voice, dry and strong and clear, the voice that had silenced a dining table of statesmen in its day. For the Dowager Duchess of Calderwood had come out of her room and stood at the head of her own stair, upright as a fire iron, in dove-grey silk, one hand on the rail, and her clouded eyes turned with terrible accuracy toward the girl in the center of the hall.
"Clara," said the dowager. "Child, before you answer my fool of a son, you will hear from the one person in this house who has nothing to gain by your answer. For I am old and blind, and shall be gone before the lilac comes round many more times. And so my word is the only one in this hall you may trust to be free of a wager." She came down one step, sure-footed, who knew her own stairs to the inch. I knew him for my son the moment he set down the first tray. I have known it all week. I said nothing, because I understood why he came, and I forgave it. Because he is a fool, but he is my fool, and he came out of love. But I did not approve of my son this week, Clara. I withheld my approval, though he had not earned it. And a mother who gives her approval unearned does her son no kindness. I gave my approval this week to one person in this house, and I gave it on the third day, long before either of you was as clever as a blind woman, and I gave it to you. I chose you, child, not for his sake, for my own, because you stood me in the rain rather than rob me of the weather, and let me spill my own tea rather than rob me of the pouring, and read me Petrarch you did not believe in because I asked, and never once in a week performed for me, because you could not be troubled to flatter a blind old woman. And do you know, Clara, in 3 years of darkness you are the first who met me and not my affliction. I made up my mind about you before my son made up his, and I am telling you so, here, in front of them all, so that when you answer him, you will know that whatever a wager is worth, you were wanted in this house by someone who set you no test at all. Now." The clouded eyes did not waver. "I have said my piece. The rest is yours. But the lilac in your arms, child, was cut by my son at dawn because I told him you stopped to smell it on the day you came. And a woman who stops for lilac in the rain has decided to go on living, and that is the only thing in a person that has ever, in the end, mattered. Answer him as you like, but answer the man, Clara, not the test. The test is over. I heard it end on the stair the night of the gravy. I hear everything." And Clara Ainsworth stood in the centre of the great hall of Calderwood Hall, with her arms full of dripping lilac cut at dawn, with 40 servants holding their breath, and a routed cousin frozen by the door, and a duke on the stair who had just spent his pride in the one market where it could not be bought back, and a blind old woman who had chosen her on the third day before anyone had asked her to. And she understood, at last, with the calm that comes after a long fright passes, that the thing she had been protecting herself from was not a danger, but a gift, and that she had so little practice at being given things that she had nearly walked to the noon coach rather than learn how. She did not weep. She had decided, at 2 in the morning, that she would not weep, and she was a woman who kept her word, even to herself. Even now. But she crossed the hall to the foot of the stair, with the lilac in her arms, and she looked up at the Duke, and she said, in a voice that the whole hall could hear, and that did not, this time, trouble to be steady, "You carried the coals so badly." "I did." "You held the umbrella wrong, and set the trays down like a swordsman, and you cannot light a fire to save your life, and you wept at a hedge, and you have just spent your whole pride in front of your own household for a woman with 11 shillings. And that, Your Grace, is the single most foolish transaction I have ever witnessed, and I was raised by a clergyman to abhor a bad bargain." She climbed the first stair, so that they stood level, the lilac crushed between them, its scent rising. "But I find I cannot grade it. I have turned it every way, and held it to the light, and there is no angle from which it reads as a wager. And I have been trying, Nathaniel. I have been trying very hard, because it is far safer to refuse you than to believe you. And I have just discovered that I am done at last with being safe. I have been safe for 2 years. It is a cold country. Yes, The answer is yes. Not to the Duke. To the man who carried the cold badly and meant it. Him I will marry. The Duke may come along, I suppose, as he appears to be attached. And the great hall of Calderwood Hall, which had not made a sound in 5 minutes, made a great deal of sound all at once. And Sturgis, the under-butler, was heard to say, "Well, I'll be—" and I told him he was soft. And Mrs. Felden was discovered to be weeping into her chatelaine, and accounting it to the lilac, and the boy who blacked the boots cheered before he could be stopped, and was not, in the event, stopped. And at the head of the stair, the Dowager Duchess of Calderwood turned her clouded eyes toward the ceiling, and let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for 3 years. And Sir Hugh Vane went out of the door, and down the steps, and into his unpaid-for curricle, and out of the story, which had no further use for him. They were married in the village church at Calderwood, when the lilac came round again the next spring, which was not so long to wait as it sounds, and the Dowager Duchess lived to see it, to hear it, rather, every sound of it, the church bell and the gravel, and her son's voice gone unsteady on the vows, and the new Duchess's voice perfectly steady on hers. For Clara had got her steadiness back, and used it now for better purposes than survival. The Dowager sat in the front pew in dove-grey silk, and turned her face to the warmth coming through the south window, and knew the hour by it. And when the rector, a young man newly come to the living, who did not know the whole tale, and thought he was marrying a duke to a gentlewoman of modest fortune, which, in a sense, he was, the fortune being 11 shillings and a refusal to flatter, when the rector said the words, the Dowager's hand found, in her lap, the chipped Sèvres cup she had insisted on bringing, against all sense, to a wedding, and her thumb settled on the chip, and she smiled. Afterward, there was no great breakfast, for Clara would not have one. "We will feed the household first, Nathaniel, and the village, and then ourselves, in that order, for that is the order in which they have earned it." And so the servants of Calderwood Hall, who had called their master John for a week, and would never quite finish teasing him for it, sat down to the wedding feast before the family did, with Sturgis at the head of the deal table, where the Duke had once eaten a servant's supper, and the Duke himself carried in the first dish to them, in his own coat, and set it down. Clara watched him do it from the doorway and laughed aloud, like a swordsman putting a blade on a table, and a hall full of servants groaned and threw bread at their master, and the Duke of Calderwood, 40,000 a year and a seat in the Lords, ducked the bread and grinned like a footman. In the years that followed, there were children at Calderwood, and they were taught very early and very firmly that the surest way to make their grandmother laugh was to creep up on her in stockinged feet and try to reach her chair before she named them, and that they never once managed it. Not one of them. Not ever. For the Dowager Duchess knew each of them by their tread before they cleared the door, the way she had known their father by his weight on a floor when he came home in a borrowed coat to guard her, the way she had known, on the 3rd day, before anyone asked her to, exactly which of the 2 strangers the world had sent to her elbow that spring was the worst thing to enter the house in a year, and which was the best. She told the children the tale, when they were old enough, on winter evenings by the fire, with the chipped cup in her hand. She told it always the same way, and it always ended the same way, with the same line, which the children would chant along with her because they had learned it by heart, that their father had put on a servant's coat to test a stranger, and had been so busy testing her that he had not noticed himself falling in love, the great fool, but that his blind old mother had noticed, sitting quietly by her fire, hearing everything, had heard the test die on the stair the night of the gravy, had chosen the girl on the 3rd day, and had only had to wait and wait and wait for the 2 cleverest young people in the county to become, at last, as clever as a woman who could not see. And every spring, when the lilac came round, the Duchess of Calderwood, who had once owned 11 shillings and a good name, and counted the name the more valuable, and counted it so still, cut an armful of it in the wet morning, and carried it into the hall, and stood it in the jars the length of the room, white and purple, dripping its scent into the air,
and stopped, every year, in the middle of the lilac walk, to put her face into the rain and breathe until her whole frame shook. And somewhere in the house, her husband, hearing nothing, would nonetheless come to a window to watch her do it, and not know who had taught him to come, though his mother could have told him, his mother who heard everything. But he had learned it the way she had learned the morning by the chip in her cup, by minding the small things, at last, for the people he loved.